Hello and welcome to Cycles of Time, your weekly guide to what's happening on Earth as we make our revolutionary journey around the sun. For time immemorial, our human ancestors have created myths and meanings to help us adapt and thrive as seasons change. Join me each week to explore the intersections of these ancient cycles, from the indigenous medicine wheel to the pagan wheel of the year, the Babylonian and Greek zodiac to the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. I'm your host, Allison Dale, and this is the Cycles of Time podcast. Hey y'all! Welcome to another week in the Cycles of Time as we trace the wheel of the year. I hope you had a wonderful week last week. If you were celebrating Beltane, May Day, International Workers' Day, this midway point between spring equinox and summer solstice has been quite a beautiful, potent time. I'm wondering if you set any intentions for things in your life that you want to see grow over the coming months. This is a really great time to do that. I took that Taurus assignment last week and spent some time getting back into my body. I've literally been sick with a lung and respiratory thing since I started this podcast back on the spring equinox, which is so ridiculous. I have so much compassion for people who are experiencing long COVID or any kind of chronic illness. It's just been an ongoing thing. So I've been sleeping a lot, and you've probably heard my nasal voice, but maybe it's getting a little better. Around Beltane, last Wednesday on May Day, I finally found some energy to go to a yoga class, and I've been since then taking some longer hikes and gone swimming with my daughter a few times. And Taurus season is all about embodiment, so I'm so happy to be moving again, even if it's super slow going compared to where I'd like to be right now in my body. But that was my kind of Beltane resolution, and what I'd like to see grow is just, more health and more embodiment in these upcoming months. What about you? Let me know in the comments. Before we jump into this week's forecast, I wanted to say thanks so much again to Lisa Brogy for coming on as my first guest last week. If you're listening, thank you, Lisa, and happy birthday. And thanks everybody for the great response we got from you last week to that episode. I definitely look forward to more guest stars as the year progresses. So if you are interested in talking about any of these cycles of time or the wheel of the year from any perspective, I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at Cycles of Time podcast on Instagram, and I would just love to talk to more folks about this because it's super fun to hear all the different perspectives. So let's just jump right into this week's highlights. On Tuesday, May 7th, tomorrow, we have a luxurious new moon in Taurus. And in the human design and I Ching wheel of the year, we're starting this week in the gate of receiving, which is gate 2, which is known as the direction of the self. And it's all about being open and receptive to the world around us, the world's gifts. Then on Friday, the sun is going to be transiting into gate 23, which is the gate of assimilation or splitting apart. And this is the same gate where Uranus met up with Jupiter a few weeks ago on April 20th for that big conjunction. So it might sound familiar as we've already talked a little bit about it, but that'll be happening Friday through next Tuesday. And the themes for this week are surrender and receive, don't try to do too much, listen more, speak less. Be open to the wisdom and the care of the world beyond your mind. And simplicity is greater than complexity. For our place in the wheel of the year, we are in the medicine wheel direction east, the wuxing cycle element of between wood and fire. So the earth element is kind of holding this transitional period between upward growing wood and outward expansive growing fire. We're in the pagan season now of Beltane, and the zodiac season Taurus from April 19th to May 20th. The moon phase, like I mentioned, is the new moon in Taurus, and the I Ching hexagram and human design gates are 2, the receptive, and 23, splitting apart. So we'll start out talking about the Taurus new moon. And I really love new moons because they're a double dose of energy of the season, with both the sun and the moon in the same part of the sky. And that's always in the sign of the season that we're in. Right now we're in Taurus season. So we have a Taurus new moon. And this may be obvious to many of you listeners who are versed in astrology or astronomy, but I like to highlight it because I remember a time not too long ago when this was new to me. The cycles of the moon I've always followed to some degree, but when I started integrating the phases of the moon with the zodiac signs, it always seemed a little bit random at first when I first started learning about it. So before learning about astrology, I knew that moons were associated with the sign, like a full moon in Scorpio or a new moon in Taurus, but I wasn't aware of the beauty that all new moons are in the sign of the month we're in, of the zodiacal season we're in, and all full moons are in the sign of the opposite side of the wheel. So it just really highlights the polarity and the kind of oppositional and unifying nature of how moons can teach us about the wheel. New moons are time of manifestation, of planting seeds, setting intentions, and full moons are times of culmination, of harvesting what has grown over the past couple of weeks since the new moon. So the new moon in Taurus feels like an especially fertile moon to me, as Taurus is such a fertile season where we're seeing so much evidence of the fact that life finds a way, to quote Jurassic Park, and there's things just always growing this season. So new moons being fertile is a time of every month that has a sort of fertility to it, a seed planting quality. And then in this time of spring, late spring, where everything is starting to really show off in its growth, it just seems like a very, very fertile and beautiful new moon. The moon is also exalted in Taurus, which means that the qualities of receptivity and femininity and embodiment that the moon holds are really highlighted in the sign of Taurus. The moon is at home in Cancer. It's ruled by Cancer, but exalted in traditional astrology kind of means like it's in a place in the sky. It's in a sign where the red carpet is being rolled out for it, and it's that planet or that luminary is being given a lot of gifts and a lot of special attention. So the moon in Taurus is a beautiful place to be for this new moon. Yesterday evening, I was out in my backyard, laying in my hammock, and I saw a sphinx moth pass by, and I started observing the sphinx moths pollinating the beautiful purple catnip that we have growing outside. Cat mint, not catnip. It's a very pretty plant the cats love. But anyway, these are huge striped amazing moths that are also known as hummingbird moths, and they're very common here in New Mexico in the summer. But these were the first that I'd seen this season, and they're almost as big as hummingbirds and have a similar motion to hummingbirds in flight, so they're really fun to watch and very beautiful. I'm actually doing a painting of one right now. It's really huge and super fun to really dig into, but I was getting lost with these cool little moths just flying around like little hummingbirds pollinating the purple flowers. And then I looked over because I heard some tiny squeaks coming out from the bird box that I had set up on my fence. And I went over and peeked in tentatively to find 4 baby bluebirds that were mouth open, squealing for food. And I didn't look too long in there, but I've heard from my birdwatcher parents and also from ornithologists on the internet that it's okay to check in on the babies in bluebird boxes because bluebirds won't abandon their nests if there's humans around. You don't want to look into a bird box when there's a mother or father bird inside, but if they're not there, you can kind of take a peek and make sure they're doing okay. So it was super cute. They were so cute. And as soon as I closed it back up and left and went back in the house, I looked out the window and saw the mother or father bird bringing some food to the little babies. So I just, having that experience outside in the backyard yesterday was such a perfect symbol of the fertile and alive Beltane season of late spring. And it really just felt perfect to be in Taurus season. And Taurus, I wanted to talk a little bit about the constellation of Taurus. Taurus is a really incredible large constellation, and it contains the bright star clusters of the Pleiades and the Hyades. And the Pleiades is where the Perseid meteor shower comes out of, or it's in that area of the sky every summer. And the constellation has been depicted in cave art that dates all the way back to 15,000 BC. And it's just pretty incredible it wasn't necessarily called the bull. There's no way of knowing at that point, but the Pleiades star cluster and the Taurus constellation that we now know of as Taurus was recorded in ancient cave art. And also the oldest recorded art that's ever been found in the Lissot caves in France about 20,000 years ago. A lot of the main subject matter was bulls, and Taurus being the bull. I just found that to be super fascinating. In the early Bronze Age, which was about 5,000 to 2,000 BC, Taurus was the constellation that the sun aligned with during the spring equinox. And with the recession of the equinoxes, which is kind of that tilt of the Earth. The Earth isn't in a perfect rotation, but it has a little bit of a wobble in its axis. So it creates a little bit of a change in which constellation we see when the spring and autumn equinoxes happen. So 5,000 years ago, it was in Taurus. And then around 2,000 years ago, it aligned with Aries, which is what we kind of still track in the zodiac today, because that's when the astrology was kind of codified and given more structure. And so we see Aries as the time of the equinox now. But before that, in ancient times, Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian empires, the bull was the spring equinox constellation. And the origins of the zodiac date back to Babylonian and Mesopotamian regions up to 5,000 BC. So as the first equinox sign, Taurus has been an incredibly important figure in the history of the zodiac. Babylonian astronomy was the first account of representing the constellation as a bull, and it was named the Bull of Heaven. I love on new moons because it's the double dose of Taurus, or the double dose of the sign that we're in. I found that last year when I was writing my astrosomatics blog every new and full moon, new moons are when I would really go into the depths of the history and the backstory of the sign, where new moons I was focused more on the polarity of the themes of what was going on between the two sides of the wheel. But I really find that when we're deep in the middle of the new moon, of the moon and sun's energy both being in a sign, it's really cool to look deep into that part of the sky and think about, wow, what was happening back in the day when people were thinking about naming these constellations and thinking about dividing the sky up into these 30-degree sections. And so, yeah, looking into the constellation and into the mythology of the bull is a little bit of what we're going to get into today. I'm currently writing a children's book. A lot of my other intentions for the Beltane week of what I want to see grow is putting more kind of large-scale content out into the world. I do a lot of Instagram posting and sharing knowledge that way. Content creation, and blogging, and of course this podcast, but I'm looking to write a book for adults and a book for children this year. And I'm currently writing one. I was very inspired last week to just get into the writing of this book about the zodiac and how it relates to the seasons for young children. And I read a little part of it to my 5-year-old daughter the other day. And when I said the word bull in the Taurus pages, she said, bull. And she had a lot of fear in her voice, kind of recoiled from me, which I thought was funny to just see that response. It made me think about how bulls in modern culture, with such a removed relationship from cattle that we have, my only relationship with cattle is like seeing them on the side of the highway driving through California, or smelling the horrible cattle farms. But we won't go into that too much. But yeah, super removed from cattle. And so right now, like when we think about a bull, or a child thinks about a bull, it's mostly associated with bullfights or the running of the bulls or something else that's aggressive like that. Or it's either aggression, or we're thinking of them like Ferdinand the Bull, which is that 1936 children's book that was made into a movie, I think in the 90s or 2000s. But Ferdinand the Bull is a bull that would rather smell the flowers than fight in bullfights. And sometimes when I'm talking about Taurus, I talk about the docile bull just really enjoying to sit and smell the flowers. Maybe it came from Ferdinand and that in my childhood as well. But there's an idealized version of the bull in our minds, at least in modern day Western culture, where bulls are either fierce, stubborn fighters or docile creatures sitting amongst the roses. And these are both true in some regards, especially astrologically, as we look at the symbolism of spring and the stubbornness of the Taurus archetype. But it's interesting to think back to the inception of the zodiac, or the early days of the zodiac, when the bull represented the incredibly important moment of the spring equinox, and what ancient people's relationship with bulls would have been then, which is very different from our binary vision of them today. I just finished reading the book Circe, or Kirke, by Madeline Miller. I mentioned this a couple episodes ago that I was getting really into it, and I finished it last week. It's a story of the Greek goddess witch, told from the perspective of herself. And part of the book tells a compelling story about the Minotaur, who was the half-bull, half-man monster from the island of Crete, who Daedalus put in a labyrinth, built a labyrinth beneath the palace, Minos' palace in the island of Crete. And I feel like most of us have heard about the Minotaur. He was definitely a monster-like creature in my recollection, and in this book, in Circe, it definitely reinforces that, where he had a voracious appetite for human blood, and he devoured many men and maidens, and their bones were found all over the labyrinth. And he was put in the labyrinth so that he couldn't kill more people, essentially. But eventually he was killed by the hero Theseus, who was given a ball of yarn by Ariadne, and was able to trace his way into the center of the labyrinth to kill the Minotaur. And so after reading Circe, I was thinking about bulls and Taurus season, and I remembered reading a chapter about the Minotaur in another book, which I had read last year, a couple years ago, when it came out. And this book is The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine by Sophie Strand. And it's a book of essays by Sophie Strand, who, for those of you who aren't familiar with her work, she's a writer who I greatly admire, and her work intertwines myths from religion and spirituality with ecology and the natural environment in a really beautiful and poetic way, so I'm a big fan. She's known as an ecofeminist, and she digs deep into the prehistory and potential ecological origins of myths and stories that we kind of take for granted. She reminds us in all of her work that when we look at Greek myths, which are chock full of monsters, rape, pillage, and heroic valor, we have to remember that many of these myths are translations of older stories, or at least fusions of two competing mythologies. And this is from her book, The Flowering Wand. So the two competing mythologies, one is focused on nature reverence and mother goddesses, and the other is characterized by violent heroes and a solarization of gods and sacred symbols. The lunar realm of the labyrinth lies under the sunlit girth of Mount Olympus, flickering in and out of the Greek pantheon. It didn't disappear when the Indo-Germanic tribes subjugated the earlier Mediterranean populations, but deracinated and replanted into a new violent mythological ecosystem. Earlier gods became murderous monsters, and goddesses withered into helpless princesses. She goes on to look at the Minotaur myth from the perspective of the Cretans, rather than from the perspective of the later Greek, Roman, and more modern tellings that have been passed down. So she tells this in this first chapter of this book. She's talking about a time before we hear about only the heroic valor of the killing of the Minotaur, but back to a time when bulls were considered sacred, not simply scary or docile or subjugated into one of those realms. So I'm going to read another passage from the chapter of the Flowering Wand about the cult of the bull now. And the chapter is called "The Minotaur Dances the Masculine Back into the Milky Way." It's super beautiful and it really struck a chord with me. So for this Taurus new moon, I'm going to read you this little story by Sophie Strand. Let us look again at the Minotaur myth, and let us closely look at what archaeologists and historians have managed to reconstruct about life on Crete, a culture that Ryan Eisler asserts was the healthy precursor to patriarchy. One of the most striking things about Neolithic art is what it does not depict, she observes. For what a people do not depict in their art can tell us as much about them as what they do. Prior to the fall of Minoan culture, Crete had no fortified walls. Most importantly, there are no known depictions of violence or war in this extensive offering of art. Instead, nature in all its wild fecundity is depicted in frescoes, mosaics, drinking vessels, statues, and seals. Spirals, snake-evocative chevrons, vegetation, and animals dominate the imagery. Women conduct rituals bare-breasted. Goddesses are flanked by lions. The few times that men appear, they are shown most often in positions suggesting awe and reverence, lifting their arms to a goddess or animal. Death is not depicted, neither is suffering. Physical pleasure, bulls, lunar reverence, communion with nature, and feminine divinity are prevalent. But I sense that the dominant theme here is not an object, but the fluid connectivity between these symbols. Minoan culture, the origin of the Minotaur, is characterized by movement, by dance itself. Cretan scholar Nicholas Platon, in his Guide to the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, muses about Minoan culture. Motion is its ruling characteristic. The figures move with lovely grace, the decorative designs whirl and turn, and even the architectural composition is allied to incessant movement, become multiform and complex. Nowhere is this better displayed than in the many images of the bull dance, which young Cretan women and men appear to leap and play with bulls. Some have speculated that this is part of a ritual sacrifice, ending with the slaying of the bull as a surrogate for a lunar king. Others postulate that the dancers themselves were the sacrifice, gored by the bull's lethal horns. But nowhere in the imagery is there blood or death. What we have is dance. Cretan culture is essentially kinetic. Divinity is reached not through heroic individualism, but through connective, dynamic play. God does not dwell in the leaping youth or the charging bull, but is constituted interstitially between the moving figures. The dance itself is the divine. The Minotaur, then, is a dancer. His horns, like those of the sacred bull, echoed the shape of the crescent moon and the lunar rhythms that welcome both light and dark. The Minotaur was the god of mutability and movement. He represented the fluid, pleasureful interface between human beings and the animate world of everything else. When Theseus slays the Minotaur, he is not slaying a monster. He is slaying an entire culture, a Cretan culture dominated by the image of a feminine divinity, flanked by lions and bulls, celebrating epiphanic communion with the natural world. In the same way, Apollo, god of order and sterility and reason, god of the left brain, kills Python, the serpent who presided over the oracle at Delphi, son of the Mother Earth goddess Gaia. Snakes are traditionally symbols of the goddess. They are literally close to the earth, pressing their whole kinetic, shivering life force against her. In mythology, we can see the slaying or degeneration of a snake as the nod to the destruction of partnership societies, nature worship, and goddess devotion. So I just love Sophie Strand's writing. You should definitely pick up this book, The Flowering Wand, if you haven't read it yet. And rereading it is just, after reading more Greek mythology, it really just gets to these beautiful, beautiful philosophies about how we can reconceive these myths that we've heard in the back of our heads throughout so many generations and reconceive them in a new way. I love looking at the symbols and signs of the zodiac as multidimensional, with myths hidden within myths, behind other myths. And I find it's such a beautiful way to always learn from the stars and from history and prehistory, and also from our ancient relationships with ecology that led us to creating the stories that are told today. And Sophie Strand does that so well, just knitting and weaving ecology and the natural world into these myths. So the theme of this story about the Minotaur, to me, is a retelling of humanity's relationship with nature. For the past couple thousand years, we've passed down stories about heroes controlling nature in one way or another, about swords slashing down dragons, and about making our marks to contain the wild and uncontrollable elements of the world, and also about how the earth doesn't know best, but how we humans know best. Another passage by Strand is, who is the monster of today's legends? Today we see a surfeit of media coverage devoted to weather and climate events. Has the biosphere become the monster? Every attempt to create weather or climate regulating technology, rather than adjusting and halting our own abysmal behaviors, posits the earth as a monster and humankind as the heroes who must control her and tame her and save her. Techno-narcissists are the new Marduk, the new Theseus. They want the myth of progress to subsume the older, although newly investigated in the realms of quantum physics and glacial ice coring, chaos of emergent systems and biospheric intelligence. Earth doesn't know best, our cultures insist, we know best, and we must progress ever onward toward greater control. She says, before his Greek bastardization into an anonymous monster, the Minotaur had a name, Asterion, or Starry One. His name may have referred to the constellation Taurus or to the rising of Sirius, an event that is correlated to Cretan festivals and sacred mead-making. So when we think of the Minotaur and the labyrinth, perhaps we are really seeing a solar system. The Minotaur is the guiding star. The labyrinth's winding courses are the paths of planets, objects, beings, galactic dust, caught in the divine pull of a horned nucleus. Ah, so poetic, Sophie Strand. Love it. She says, despite the preponderance of labyrinth myths and images, no remains of a labyrinth have ever been located in Crete. I've been to Crete. I went there when I was 25 or so and drove around with a bunch of other girls that I met on the ferry and definitely learned that there was no labyrinth there. So Sophie Strand offers another interpretation, that the labyrinth was never a static object or a place. It was never a stone corridor. Instead, it was an event. It was a ritual dance to honor the bull and the annual rising of certain constellations. Each passageway was a chain of human hands, a serpentine gyration of gestures. The labyrinth was only ever the sacred relationship between people dancing, ecstatically, kinetically, inscribing the patterns of sky into the soft dirt of the ground. If the Minotaur offers the masculine anything, it is the healing power of playful, expressive movement. Also so Taurus. The movement and embodiment and expression of Taurus. The kind of movement that understands it is always in dialogue with other animals, the weather, the texture, and slope of the landscape between our toes. Let the masculine learn how to dance again, and like the starry Asterion, the more we dance, the more people will be attracted into our orbit of participatory, exultant celebration. Finally, let the Minotaur stand as a reminder, she says. There are no monsters, only bad rewrites of forgotten stories. So I had to read this to you today because it's not only relevant to the new moon in Taurus this week, but also to the human design gate and I Ching hexagram that the sun is transiting through right now as well. And that is the gate of the receptive. So the Taurus new moon highlights the fertility and fecundity of the earth, and the I Ching hexagram, or human design gate number 2, is right on target with that symbolism as well. Hexagram 2 is called the receptive, and it's composed of 2 of the same trigrams, the 3 broken yin lines that represent earth. So it's earth over earth, 6 yin broken lines as opposed to the solid lines of yang. And it's the most yin hexagram out of the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. It sits across the wheel. If you look at the diagram of the wheel that I have on my astrosomatics.substack blog or on Instagram pinned to the top at Cycles of Time podcast, you can look across from the gate that we're in, gate 2, to the other side of the wheel, which is gate 1. And gate 1, or hexagram 1, has 6 solid lines, and it's the most yang hexagram, which is known as heaven over heaven, or the creative. So Earth over Earth this week, on the week of the Taurus new moon, the receptive, is telling us to submit, to receive, and to relax into the world around us. Like I mentioned last week, our culture, especially here in the West, is very yang-oriented. It rewards creation, and thus we're always creating, always trying to be the hero, always using our swords to cut reality up into something that is seen as valuable or different or unique or independent or strong. I consider myself a creative person as an artist, and I love the power of creation, where I take a blank canvas or a page, a blank computer screen, and make it into something that carries meaning. It's my favorite thing to do. But I notice in my creative work that if I don't take time to rest and to be open and to receive, the creations that I'm making have no inspiration to manifest out of except for themselves. And that's very, very circulatory, and no fertile soil to grow from. So receptivity and receiving is such a big part of the creative process that in our culture we often forget to have time for, to make time for. And it's amazing how much we forget this in today's world. Like, I look at the amount of content creators whose media content I consume every day on the channels of Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And within that, always sprinkled within the beautiful content that is being creative and the thought leadership and the funny videos, there are so many complaints about how the algorithm rewards constant creation. Like, you have to post every day in order to be seen, in order for the meta algorithm to select you as someone who deserves to be seen. And it's kind of insane. There's so much funny, quality, amazing video and text and photographic thought leadership on the internet. Like, it's stunning and astounding to see how much creativity is being poured into the little boxes in our hands every day. But there's such a burnout curve with it that I notice from everyone that I have talked to about this creation, where people have to kind of flat out quit and announce that they're quitting because they can't keep up with the pace of the constant creation that's required of us as creators in this world. And I just think that that's so telling, and how it really highlights the importance of this week. We all need time to receive. We need time to listen to something not with an agenda or thinking about how we could repurpose what is being said into our next creation, and not to take notes and make bullet points about the most important or relevant details, but simply to receive the totality of the world that we are within, the larger context, and letting it flow over us like water, to let the meaning and the details trickle down to us through osmosis rather than through control. And it's just so hard. It's so against the dominant overculture to do that. I'm sorting that out in my therapeutic practices right now. As much as I think I'm good at receiving, I really realize that I'm not. And this came up fairly strongly recently when I discovered I've been going to the library with my daughter a lot, and I read a lot of children's books since I have a toddler, young child, but I rarely go to the adult section and just pick up something to read. I have a ton of bookshelves with half-read books on them, or books that have been highlighted or dog-eared or underlined for something that I was researching. But as far as just going to the library and picking up a book and reading it for the sake of reading it is something that I'm just now rediscovering in my middle life here. When I was a kid, I loved books. I read a ton of them, and I wrote a lot of my own stories, and I listened to audiobooks, and I just loved the art of storytelling as a kid more than anything. And recently, I realized that the way that I've been reading for a really long time, probably since high school, it was to do that underlining and dog-earing and remembering passages so that I could get the most out of the book. And I remember reading as a kid, just like book after book after book. I read without any intention of my own, without any desire to control the outcome, or without any need to write a paper about it, or work what I'm reading into a theory, or talk about an interesting point at a party. Like, as a kid, I just read for the sake of receiving what was on the page, picking up what someone else was putting down. And it was super relaxing and fun. And only this year have I begun reading like this again, after seriously half my life, many, many years. And it's been such a gift to just receive and just relax into what's being offered without any outcome. I mean, I know I just highlighted and read some pieces of chapters that I read already in this podcast. But I think I'm getting more from reading everything that I read, because I'm going into it with that more receptive quality rather than, where's my reference book? Like what do I need to add to my existing structure of that? And it's just this openness and receptivity that has been a really beautiful addition to my daily life. Imagine how wonderful it would be if our culture rewarded periods of receiving the same way it rewarded periods of creation. If we're lucky, some of us have the ability to go on retreats or on vacations where the purpose is receiving. But oftentimes, even these experiences, I find, can become so pressurized to fill up every moment with doing something or making something out of our rest time that we can't really see the benefit of absorbing what is right there, because we have too high of an expectation of what it was supposed to be, or it's just too filled up with stuff. So I just would love to give everyone here, everyone that's listening, a permission slip to receive this week, to put down the control, to not think about how we can carve something up into a smaller, more efficient thing, and just to receive the wildness and for what it is. In the past couple of weeks, I've been talking about the gates of the I Ching have been all about kind of pruning the garden and tending to the weeds and, picking things out and then watering what we want to see grow. But this week, I would say just let it be. Like, let the flower blossom and let it continue blossoming. And if there's weeds that spring up around the blossom, that's okay, because we know that the blossom is surviving. We know that it's doing its thing, and that those weeds actually aren't hurting anything at this point. So it's not a week for pruning or picking weeds, or even, keep watering your plants, obviously, but it's not a week to make sure that anything is going to happen. It's really just a week of receiving, of being in that yin quality for this short time that it's offered to us. This week, in honor of Taurus season and Gate 2 receiving, I definitely encourage you also to read for the sake of receiving what's on the page, and take a walk with no destination in mind, receiving the songs of the birds and the smells of the flowers. Maybe go to a art gallery or a museum and receive the art without trying to figure out what it's all about, but just be open. And things will come to you. The more open we are, I've found, the faster and the more flowing things come by just feeding into that energy. It's like, some animals can smell fear. I think that the world can also smell the opposite of fear. It can smell openness and receptivity and absorption. So think about that. I do want to mention another book that I just got because it really ties into this, into all of what we've been talking about. And I got another book in the mail the other day called The Medicine Wheel for the Planet, A Journey Toward Personal and Ecological Healing, which is written by an Indigenous restoration ecologist named Jennifer Grenz. And similarly to The Flowering Wand, Sophie Strand's book, it's about our relationship as humans to the natural world and how we spend so much time trying to control it or to know what's right for the natural world that we forget to listen to it. So this book, a little bit different from the concept of heroes slaughtering dragons, the author, Grenz, talks about the kind of do-good mentality of restoration and conservation ecologists as kind of equally nefarious in a different way. She shares many stories about the party line of restoration ecology, which is to identify invasive species, remove them, and plant native plants in their place to restore the ecosystem to its pure natural state. And she shares in this book, I've only read the first couple chapters, but she shares a lot about how so many of these restoration ecology projects that have that philosophy end up in failure. Grenz calls this type of ecology Eden ecology, which is an ecology with notions of perfectionism of the environment. In her book, she writes, "Modern ecology is rooted in the perfect creation of Earth by God, who later added his perfect human creations, Adam and Eve, in the image of himself. They resided within the Garden of Eden with the intention to multiply, to steward the earth, all in complete obedience to God until that fateful day. Their fall from grace was the impetus for the lifelong human quest of restoration and a return to Eden, where the ultimate goal is to restore, to put things back the way they were when they were perfect. This has given rise to an ecology based on dichotomies, hierarchies, and notions of perfectionism, all of which are hindering our progress in healing the land at this critical juncture in our climate history." She talks about this underlying mythos of modern ecology not as purposeful, but as something that has arisen from the underlying colonial story of conquest that kind of gets into all of the different disciplines. In something as good, like perceivably good as restoration ecology, there's still a narrative that we have to be in control. And since we humans were the destroyers of the ecosystems, maybe by being the heroes that Strand is talking about, we also have to be the ones to actively right our wrongs by putting things back the way they used to be. And she calls this a human environmental apology tour. So many of these projects that she was working on as a field ecologist failed because once the invasive species were removed and native plants were planted, there wasn't usually a plan in place to tend to these new plants or to choose the right environment for them in the first place. Like she would be directed to plant native species within like a concrete triangle in a parking garage, for example, or plant a whole forest of conifers on a old dump site that doesn't have any shade. And, she went back past that plot of land that she had planted with a lot of young students and at-risk youth, and she had felt very, good about this project, but she had a student drive back past it a year later, and every single one of the trees had died because there was just this kind of like set it and forget it, plug and play mentality about fixing the problems that we have created. And so, there wasn't like an integrated relational type of plan that went into most of the work that she had been doing, which was high-level academic work, government-level work. And so she found that in her work, the search for the capital T truth of what is perfect always seems to leave human relationship with the land and with the rest of the earth out of the equation. Whether you're killing a dragon for once and for good, or trying to restore the habitat and reintroduce a species so that, some kind of dragon may live again, the underlying issue with the mentality of humans as creators or these active young controllers is that we humans are not an ongoing part of the ecosystem and the relationship with it. We create conservation areas where people are not allowed to go because of the fear that they may hurt the plants and animals, but we're also, in doing that, not allowing the reciprocity of humans to tend to it. And so I thought this was just a really interesting kind of flip perspective on that heroic and conquering narrative, because it's just, I hadn't really thought about it this way before, but it's just a different way. It's like a polar opposite but unifying kind of equal way of looking through the same lens, not changing the lens that we're looking at our relationship of creativity and reciprocity and receiving with the earth. Gens notes in the book that this Eden ecology of putting things back to perfection and leaving out human relationship is harmful to both plants and people, because this root story of needing to control the environment in order to bring it back to perfection. She says, we've been creating environmental facades eventually doomed to fail without us. She continues, an indigenous worldview embraces the great mystery, allowing us all to exist in a world of small t truths, as opposed to capital T truths. We don't have to have all the answers, as we are free of absolutes. Our stories are meant to evolve to fit our current reality. They are not one size fits all. Their dynamic nature makes them very much alive. There is no need to double down on an old story to assert its relevancy. It's just time for altered or new stories as we learn more. So I'm talking about this in relationship to Taurus season and gate 2, because there is so much we can learn from the earth herself. And also, like Ferdinand the Bull, so much we can learn from receiving the present moment, stopping and smelling the flowers, and being here now. Last week we talked about gate 24 was the gate of kind of getting out of the addictive patterns of thought that are in our mind and sitting still long enough for a new pattern to arise. You know, the addiction is in circles and inspiration or innovation thinks in spirals. And similarly, this week's gate of receiving and new moon in Taurus are asking us, what is a way to create a new story and to get out of the constant creation as the only way of being mentality? And the only way to learn more and to create new stories is to first listen and to receive. And only then will it become clear that there is no separation between ourselves and the rest of the earth, the animals and plants and the land when it comes to healing. The I Ching, human design mandala, the zodiac, the whooshing cycle, the wheel of the year, and the medicine wheel are all circles. And to me, the coolest thing about circles and cyclic thought is that there is always a polarity, which is the place across the circle. And it's an opposing yet unifying energy that holds the circle together. It's really easy and clear to look at that this week with the sun in the maximum yin gate 2, the all yin, which is opposite the maximum yang gate in gate 1 across the wheel. So receiving and listening to the earth in polarity with creatively acting upon it is a relational action, just as all of the polarities are in the wheel. It's all relational. And that's what I love so much about this conversation and this practice and bringing them all together is noticing that the wheel is in motion, and it's only in motion because there is this kind of tension and polarity from each side, which builds relationship. That tension between two opposing ideals or two opposing ways of being, creation and reception, receiving, are what are holding it all together. And the dialogue between those two is what is making the wheel turn. In order for a wheel to turn, there must be action and response, creation and reception, and that is something to contemplate this week. Hopefully you can do that as you sit under a tree and receive the transient beauty of the swaying branches, the sphinx moths, the drifting clouds above, and the sliver of the Taurus new moon that is rising over the horizon. On Friday through Tuesday of this week, the sun will be transiting through gate 23, the gate of assimilation, known as splitting apart in the I Ching. And if we have done our job and truly allowed ourselves to receive this week while we're in Gate 2, Gate 23, starting this weekend, will give us the potential to communicate radical ideas and initiate transformation. And this is done through explaining complex concepts in a clear and concise manner. And I'll talk more about this gate next week because I'm ready to wrap up here. But I just want to say that I find that when I have given myself ample time away from my creations and been in receiving mode, when I do get back to the computer or the drawing board, the literal drawing board, I have much more amazing insights and much more clarity than if I'd just been trying to please the algorithm or please someone else's deadlines through that constant creation. So that's something to think about as we transit from the gate of receiving to the gate of assimilating complex ideas. All the love to you guys this week. As always, your likes and subscribes mean so much to me, as do your comments and feedback about how this week's energies are showing up for you. You can find me on Instagram at Cycles of Time Podcast or Astrosomatics and leave a comment there. I'm always posting kind of follow-up. I usually record the episode Friday or Saturday before the week ahead, and then I spend the next week kind of distilling what it is that I've spoken and spoken out loud. So I usually add a lot more insights later on. So you can follow Cycles of Time Podcast or Astrosomatics to find those posts and engage with them there. And we also have a Cycles of Time Facebook group for community discussion about the week's energies too. So I'd love it if you join that and join the conversation. And if you're listening to the podcast and would like to receive this as a transcript plus audio every Monday in your inbox, plus additional photos and resources, you can subscribe to it for free at my Substack at astrosomatics.substack.com and get it in your inbox. So everyone, it's been a pleasure. Have a beautifully receptive week ahead, and I will catch you next Monday. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.